I think what I'm going to start off with is getting you to understand a juniper. There are hundreds of varieties of junipers, and there are crossbreds, and some have this, and someone will try to explain to you, but mine does this or mine does this. So I'm going to very easily group them into two groups, and all of them will fall into these two groups. So I'm going to explain the two groups to you, and yours will fall somewhere under there. If you follow those two rules, it will work to all of the species that fall under those two groups. And I've brought two with me now just to show you the main difference between the two. Funnily enough, this one's going to go here. And the difference is, one is a mounding juniper, and the other one is a running juniper. So there are two groups, mounding junipers and running junipers. Okay, the most common mounding juniper that you guys are going to know is obviously our good old Procumbens nana, which I'm sure a lot of you have, which in my honest opinion is probably the best juniper for bonsai in this country, because you can't really kill them. They're quite easy. And then we have something like the Shinensis or the Itoigawa, the Sergeants, which fall under the running juniper. Now the main difference between the two is a mounding juniper needs to mound before it will start running, and a running juniper needs to run before it will start mounding. Does that make sense to everybody? No. Right. So if I wanted a branch out over here, and I've got this over here, how do I get this branch out of here? How do I get it to come all the way out here? On this tree, I'm going to let this mound. I'm going to let this get more and more foliage. You'll see it'll start mounding. It'll become a big, dense ball of foliage. And suddenly, it'll shoot out a runner. So it needs to mound first before it starts running. Okay, that's how it sends out that runner. Okay, you will notice these things. They get nice, big and bushy, and suddenly you'll see them start going. Normally they go downwards because they are a carpet juniper. They like to go along the ground, but that's how they start. They mound, and as soon as they have started mounding, they run. So when you're cutting back, trying to get this tip to grow, and you're cutting it, leave it. Let it mound. Suddenly you will see a shoot will go, and that shoot will then speed off, and you will then be able to get out over here. Now, on these ones, what happens a lot of the time, and here's a perfect example, is they become long and leggy. Everyone know that? And they're all given up, and they go, this thing, I cut it back, it never mounds, it never mounds. If you want foliage over here, you need to let it run a long way that way. Once it starts running, it will mound its foliage further back. So that is the big difference between the two. Mounding juniper and a running juniper.
So when it's running, would you wait for it to run quite a bit and leave it until it starts mounding on that?
So unfortunately, I don't have any of mine here, and Gary didn't have one that was, doing what so I could show you. But as soon as this one is running, and you can see how much growth is happening behind it. It's because of the energy going through that part of the trunk. It creates growth further back. Then what happens is you're going to end up with a long runner, but you're going to have quite nice, dense foliage. You then cut it back to too strong of those, and you let those two runs. That foliage at the back is going to mound up even more. And what you end up is having a beautiful, strong pad within 3-4 years. So I'll go through all of that now with you, but what I wanted to explain is the difference between the two. Now, you will find most of the Shinensis falls into the runners. There are some Itoigawa and things like that will fall into the mounding, where it mounds up. You can see how strong these are starting to get at the top. And you can actually see, because this one is the strongest mound, you can actually see one little tip that is going to want to start going. Okay, so this one, I need a branch here, let it mound up. It will send out a branch, I promise you. They will mound up very, very easily. You can get nice, dense foliage pads, no problem at all. But if you need a branch out here, that's what you've got to do. These ones, they seem to get, everyone says they're leggy, but I keep trimming it, and I keep trimming it. Don't trim it. let it run. It will then mound that foliage for you. So that is the difference between the two. The next part, which I think is important, and the easiest way I've got to explain this, and a lot of them are the same, is sort of run through a yearly calendar with you of what to do on your junipers. And once you get into this routine, after 2 years, 3 years or so, you will start seeing how easy these become. You will work on them twice, maybe 3 times a year, and they will be very rewarding, and they'll become a very simple, easy tree. Okay, so you just got to start following these sort of steps of when to do what best. So I think let's start in spring, and we'll just take it from there. Number one and best time in spring, you can do 2 things. You can style or you can repot. But you cannot style and repot. Now I know there's lots of people out there going to tell me, but I style and repot my procumbents. You probably get away with it. They are very tough. But it cannot be guaranteed. Unless it's guaranteed, I wouldn't do it. So you need to choose. Now you ask me, well, I want to style it, but I also think it needs repotting. What should I do first? What should the answer be? Why repot? Health of the tree. Everybody, health of your tree. If you haven't got a strong tree, whatever you're going to do is just going to make it go backwards. So health of the tree must always come first. I know you're itching to style it. You've had it for a while. You know what you want to do. Get it healthy first. Okay. So number one best time, spring, either style or repot. Okay, once we have done that, when we repot, keep a lot of foliage. The strength of a juniper lies in its foliage. Do we all know this? The strength of a juniper is in its foliage. The strength of a pine is in its roots. The strength of an olive is in its trunk. Okay, so you need to learn your bonsais where the strength of that tree lies. Okay, is it the leaves, the roots, the trunk? Most of our trees here are the trunks. Most of them. Okay. So these ones are the, try to take a little, not too much off if you're repotting. As I said, styling or repotting. And reduce the roots up to 50%. Never ever bare root. Never ever bare root to juniper unless you are really experienced and you've collected them from somewhere and you're trying to get rid of the garden soil. Okay? But be experienced in that. Then we let them grow through that spring period. Does everyone know when to repot a juniper? Now, I'm never going to give, we all from different parts, and we all come from different areas of South Africa, and even within Durban, we're going to get 10 different, people doing different things. In winter, your junipers get, I know here in Durban you don't have winter, but most of us do. You get, the junipers become dull. And you will start seeing a slight changing. I'm not talking about a growing tip. You'll see your juniper will start changing color, ever so slightly. That is the time when you do a repot. So when someone says to you, do it in September, they're talking rubbish. Tell them, when I see the change in my tree, that's when I repot. Okay? You cannot go on a time. You need, the tree will tell you when it's ready to be repotted. So that is when you're able, when you see that dull foliage start to just change before the growing tips. Once you see the growing tips, you're almost too late. You can go, but you're almost too late. You need to see that color change in your tree. Best time to repot. Okay. Then we let them grow through spring. Then I would say sort of mid to late spring, once that new growth is hardened off, you can come and cut back. You can do small restyling, so no heavy bending or anything like that. If you need to wire a small branch in place, by all means. But you need to come and cut them back so they can then produce a second flush of growth. If you time that correctly, you can actually do it a second time and get a third flush of growth. Okay? Very important. The next operation for them is something that I think was very misunderstood or was lost in translation, is why Japanese junipers have red bark. You can tell me, or why they polish their bark. And a lot of people thought it was for aesthetics. And it's absolutely not the case. There's a little bug that we now have here in this country, especially in Cape Town. I'm sure you have it up here, called the borer. And the favorite place for a borer to hide is underneath the juniper's bark. So they got into a habit of cleaning the bark, cleaning off the flaking bark, because it's the only way that you will find that borer. You will suddenly start cleaning and you'll start seeing sort of chew marks across the live vein. And if you don't do that, it'll do it underneath, you won't see it, and suddenly your tree will die. So that is where that came from, the cleaning of your live vein. Great time to do it is in midsummer when the pests are most active. It doesn't harm the tree. You are pulling off dead bark, basically, but get into the habit of doing it. It is not for aesthetics. You don't have to sand it and get that red. You can leave it, but get into the habit of pulling off that bark that is starting to peel on your junipers, because that's where the bugs love to hide. And once your tree starts browning, it's too late. You've got to find that first. I did a demo for our club in November last year, I think it was, and one of the members bought a tree, and I was showing them how to do this, and we took off the first layer, and would you believe it, there it was. And he had probably about this much live vein left. If I didn't caught it then, that tree was gone. It was a nice tree. So get into the habit of cleaning your juniper's bark. You don't need to scrub it and polish it and make it, oil it and make it look bright red, but just get into the habit of cleaning. But that is where that originated from. That's where it has come from. It wasn't that the fact that they were making their, the red bark and the white veins. It wasn't that. It was the fact that they're looking after a pest that gets into their bark, and we now have that borer here. Through pallets that are coming in, shippings and all sorts of things, they spread everywhere. Right, then we move on to sort of early autumn. And the best time to create live veins on your junipers is early autumn. Anyone tell me why? Correct. So the wounds heal very quickly. In autumn, the tree puts on its bulk, and that cambium layer starts building up very quickly. So when you scar it or harm it, it heals over very, very quickly. So it is the best time to create live veins, running veins, or create deadwood in your junipers. On procumbents, they are pretty hardy. They can take quite a lot. On these, once they get to a certain age, they become vein specific, which means a certain root will feed a certain branch. So that root in the soil, it follows up the trunk, and it goes all the way up and it feeds a certain branch. And if you now come and you cross that and you break that vein, that branch will die. But they are quite easy once you've cleaned them to follow a vein. You can actually see the way that the tissue runs, and you follow the vein up. But that is normally on older ones. On younger ones, up to sort of 12, 15 years, you should be fine. Just don't obviously go right the way around, because you can't ring bark them. They're not baobabs. Then we move on to later in autumn. And as you can see, for example, this one here, it's quite a full tree. And once this one starts mounding, it'll get even fuller. You will not see in it. What we need to do is come in and start cleaning them out to let light in during the winter. And your quality of your tree and the growth you'll get the next spring really comes from that cleaning out in late autumn. But it's a habit. As I said to you at the beginning, you've got to start. You're not going to see results the first year. You need to wait for that second year, third year. So we're either repotting or restyling in spring. We're cutting back in late spring. Deadwood work, clean out. So we're going to work on our tree maximum 4 times a year, most of the time twice a year. And that's your juniper. It stays there, it's nice and easy, and that's how you just get into that routine. Are there questions on that routine? Has anybody got, hey, I don't know when I would do this?
Can you repot junipers in mid-autumn?
So, yeah, so I did say at the beginning your number one best time to repot and style is spring. The second time would be autumn. But you cannot be as aggressive as you were in the spring. You cannot be as aggressive. Okay. So what I want to do now is we've got a nice little procumbence. I was going to work on this tree, but Gary told me as I was about to start cutting it that he's actually repotted it this year. So I've decided I'm going to leave it. It is also a little bit late in the season to start doing heavy bends on a juniper. The reason is once they start growing quite strongly, the cambium, the water is flowing quite strong within that cambium. And when you start bending, the cambium actually separates from the hardwood and you actually can just tear it off. I don't know if you've noticed that on a juniper. I'm sure the guys doing these outside this morning noticed it. You just touch it and you can peel that bark off. So, you know, this is a very nice tree. I think Ryan Neal worked on this tree at one stage of its life. This come from me. So this was a Cape Town. This was a very interesting story. I don't know if you all know the Ottery hypermarket in Cape Town, one of the oldest shopping centers. In 1956 or 59, they did the original parking lots in that, and they were all junipers. They planted junipers between each car. And they redid the parking lot in 2013, I think. And they were bulldozing all these things out, and I drove past one day and I said, can we come and dig them? And I took some friends and we went and dug a whole lot of them. So these are them. So these were very, very old trees. You know, we're talking 60 years old. They're small and like this. They were treated as hedges. They were hedge pruned. And cars have hit them and they were in parking lots. So you can imagine what they went through. But, you know, they do grow very, very strongly. I think this one, Gary, I know Gary said to me here in Durbs, from Kloof to, where were you, in Westville, yeah. The different climates that you guys have where junipers grow not fine and they just don't do well at all. There was one stage where Gary sent all his junipers down to me, and I've just sent them all back because now he's moved back to Kloof because they weren't doing well. So I think they do need a bit of cold. I think that's what your issue was, but they do like a bit of cold. So I know you were telling me in Zululand, no go. Hey, Richards Bay, they just struggle. Too hot. But where do they come from in America? They grow in the Utah desert. So maybe it's the sea air, who knows, maybe it's a combination. Yeah, the cold. Okay. So Gary's brought along, Gary's allowed me to, I sort of chose this one because it is a procumbence. They are way more forgiving.
Sorry, Brad, where does the sergeant fit in? Because it's very different to either of them.
So that's a type of, but it fits only when it's mounded. So it fits into a mounding. It's a mounder.
But the spikes are...
Correct. But, well, then it depends. So sergeant, there's a lot of sergeant. And there's a lot of crossbreeds. And there is certain, you know, if you go to Japan, everybody has their own Itagawa. I think this nursery will tell you theirs is the best, and theirs is the best, and the Kishu's the best. So there's a lot of variants of that. So a lot of them do different things. You'll notice, let it mound. If it's not mounding, let it run. And then let it start mounding. And you'll figure out which one it is. So as long as you stick to what I was explaining to you in the beginning, you'll figure out. But a true sergeant juniper is a mounding juniper, so it mounds and then runs. It would fall into this class instead of the runner, which then mounds. Okay. Where this is a grey owl, this needs to run before it mounds.
My sergeants have got the same foliage. Long spikes, lots of foliage all the way up. Just going.
Yeah. So cut back to the two next strong ones and see if you get more foliage behind. And that'll tell you if it is. Okay. What I'd like to do on this, it's going to be, I think it's, Gary's grown these. These are fantastic. What I found from my personal experience, I grow them in the ground and I grow them in pots. And I find my ones growing in deeper pots grow faster than the ones in the ground. Okay? I can't explain it to you. I have just found a nice deep pot They seem to grow and fatten up faster than they do in the ground. The other problem is once they're really in the ground and they start getting nice and thick, you lift them, not so easy to lift, you lose a lot. So the ones that are in the ground, I air layer them and take them out. I don't actually dig them up, I just air layer them. Okay, so it's, and then don't lose any because they air layer pretty easily. All right. So Gary's been growing this one for a while. It's got good movement, but it needs just to be put into a final, into a nice shape. So I'll just let you all have a look at it.
Do you think the faster growing in the pots is because of the heat on the roots?
It could be. Mine sit next to each other, maybe. I do find that they grow better in a deeper pot, not a shallower pot, so a deeper pot.
Yeah, because then they can grow kind of unconstrained, but the difference then would be the heat in the roots versus
Could be. Could be.
or they dry out better.
Yeah. I want to bring it this way. Yeah. And then just the other side. So this is typically what you would find once you're growing it, and this has had its first clean out, and it's been simplified, but it now just needs a little bit of refinement, and these can make fantastic trees. I think Ryan Neal said it somewhere in one of his video blogs. He said, this is the best juniper to grow. They're so forgiving. You can cut them back. They just come back. They don't die. I mean, what better bonsai could you ask for? So, and I agree. I really do enjoy them. I've got some that have got foliage that looks like those over there, but they are procumbents because they get treated correctly. The foliage will actually change to that foliage. Okay, Vicky, you've seen them. So they change quite a bit, but any cutting on them, they revert back to this. So it's very difficult to keep. Okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through this. This tree wasn't thinned out, as I'm calling it in autumn, when I'm saying you need to thin it out so that the light can penetrate, so you don't get that. Okay, so it's a nice old branch, but it's never going to do anything. Do you see how weak and spindly that foliage is on? So you can try keep this branch and keep this branch. You're just going to fight a losing battle. So what do? How do we eliminate it? We take it and we trim it off. That is never going to do anything for you. Out of that crotch, I'm telling you now, a strong shoot will develop. That strong shoot, within 2 years, will be twice the thickness of this with 10 times the amount of foliage. Take them and cut them off. They are spindly. What these are doing are taking more energy from the tree than they are giving back to the tree. So this is an energy sapper. So get rid of it. You are going to get a healthier tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this tree very quickly and start taking out very weak, spindly branches in place of ones that are, you see what I'm taking out? Okay. This tree's going to look quite bare afterwards. I'm telling you now, within a year and a half, this tree will be fuller than if you left this on 10 years later, you're still going to have the same thing. Are there any questions?
What is your preferred soil mix?
It's a very good question. No. My mix that I use, and this is what works for me, and everybody is going to have their own mix. I think this is the most heated conversation in bonsai. For me, I use a 1-1-1 mix for my junipers. So 1 Nakadama, 1 pumice, and 1 leca. Okay, that's what I use. I feel like I get better results. Yes, the soils are more expensive. I don't have a lot of thousands of junipers, and the ones that are more refined, that's what I plant them into. And that's what works for me. The ramification I get is 10-fold better than any other soil mix that I use. So that's what works for me. Some guys use a bit higher. My trees stay too wet in winter, so I try err on the side of a bit more open mix so that in winter my trees dry out. Otherwise, they just stay wet the whole way through winter with our winter rains and the cold. They can get fat. No, they're bigger. I mean, I've seen procumbents. Most of them are regrafted with Itowigawa and stuff. They change the foliage, but they collect them and they're massive like this. Okay, massive. But they're low. They're not high because they grow on the ground. But they call them. They say in Japan, you're cheating when you use these.
Yes.
It's too easy. You can't use that. It's too easy as a bonsai. Huh? Never. I'd love that. I'd love that problem. Too easy. No, no. Deep pot, and you've got to let it run. You've got to let those. So as I was saying, when they mound up and they send out those runners, I mean, I get runners that long in one season, easily. But you have to let that run. That's how you're going to get the girth. And you've got to let it run all over. But you've got to go and clean them out. Otherwise, they get very, all dead inside. So you've got to keep cleaning them out. But you don't touch those ends. You let them run. And that's where you get your girth from. And they bend very easily. I mean, junipers bend extremely well. I'm working on one at the moment. I did a demo at our club dig. We had trunks this sort of size that we're bending. No problem. You know, we can put circles in them. So you just got to know what you're doing. You've got to remove a lot of the core, but they bend beautifully easily. You need a bit of strength to get them into place, but they really do bend. The thing with juniper, which is very important, is when you're bending them, they stretch better than they compress. So what I'm meaning is if you've got a live vein, you want that live vein to be on the compression side so that the tissue, the growing tissue, will stretch. If you've got it the other way around, when they compress like that, that tissue gets squashed. They don't like that. That can cause the live vein to die.
You mean the other way around?
No.
The live vein on the outside so it gets stretched.
No, I'm talking where the live vein is. The live vein should be on the outside, so when you bend it, it stretches out. They don't like to be compressed on the inside. So that's why a lot of the time we'll hollow out on the inside. If there's a very thick branch, we'll hollow out on the inside, and then you can bend it. So they do like stretching. Any other questions?
Can I ask something to the scope?
Yeah, sure. So there are lots of theories. I personally use raffia because it's been tried and tested for so many years and it works. There are guys that use the raffia and then tape it afterwards to keep the moisture into the raffia. What the raffia is doing is it's stopping. So when I do a raffia bend, normally we have a wire spline on the inside as well, which stops the branch from suddenly doing this because you need to, when you've got the thicker wire in there and you're bending wire, you bend it slowly. It doesn't just suddenly snap. So that helps with the control of the bend. What the raffia does is it pushes against the cambium and stops it from splitting. Well, helps stop it from splitting unless you really go to the extreme. So that is what it's doing. And you find if you do a little bit of time, you sort of stretch it. And as you stretch it, leave a bit, you stretch it a bit more, it's able to stretch. So it's not really stopping wire bite or the wire digging in. It's actually to firm up the cambium to stop it from tearing.
So your spine, you raffia that onto your trunk at the top or the bottom?
So as I explained to you earlier, if I'm carving part of the trunk out, I actually put very thick aluminum, copper wire inside there, and you make sure you secure it to both sides, and then I raffia around that. Then I wire around that whole thing and then bend.
Brent, why do you use copper wire?
Copper wire, so that size copper wire will hold the same equivalent to that size aluminium. Does everybody know why? Okay, they call it work hardening. So what we do with the copper wire when we are making bonsai, copper wire for bonsai, we put it through a heat process. It's called annealing. The copper becomes soft and pliable, but once it is bent, it hardens. So it work hardens. And it then holds its form a lot better than something like aluminium, which I can bend this 100 times. it's not getting any harder. If I do the tip of this 10 times, each time it's already getting harder to bend it. I can't just, it's now hard. So it's work hardened, the metal actually hardens up. So I can use a lot thinner wire on here and it just holds a lot better. Now, it's not to say the copper wire is better than aluminium wire, because aluminium wire serves a purpose, for example, your olives. You do not want to be wiring your olives with copper wire. Anyone tell me why? For the same reason that this hardens, it's a lot more abrasive. And a cambium on an olive is extremely thin. You've all done it. You scratch it to see if it's green and growing yet, and you just touch it and you'll see that green through it. So we use an aluminium wire because it is softer and more pliable and easier to apply. Yes, we have to use a thicker wire, but aluminium will do a much better job on an olive, for an example, than copper. As for Japanese maples, Chinese maples, elms, prefer to use this. Okay, it's softer. But the holding power of the copper, you get much thinner wire will do the same holding power as this, and it will actually hold better than this as well because it hardens. It's not pliable. Where it hardens and your tree grows and the branch gets heavier, and sometimes the aluminium wire, if you've gone too thin, you'll start seeing your branch go down because you've wired with too thin. It won't happen with the copper. So preferable on junipers or conifer-based pines, that sort of thing. But aluminium for everything else, also cheaper and a lot easier to do. I make my own copper wire, but it's, you know, it's a lot softer, the aluminium.